Hi folks, my name is Bana. I wanted to reflect on and respond to some patterns that I've been seeing in the feeds lately. Uh, One is sort of videos of like, I'm tapping out of spirituality entirely, and here is why. Um, and a part of that is kind of linked to sort of Neo Advaita or kind of modern westernized non-dual teachings. And I think that a lot of people kind of go through the eye of the needle of non-duality and then pop out the other side going, well, what's the point in any of it really? And I acknowledge that there's some problematics in different communities which might call for releasing the idea of teacher and teaching as well. I'm certainly not polarizing myself in relation to any of this stuff. But I guess I wanted to share why I feel it's actually a really helpful thing to remain engaged in the concept of spirituality, the concept of awakening, and even the concept of duality. As a person who sits in a very non-dual space, both experientially and in terms of my preferred teachings, I also really value things like bhakti, prayer, devotion, and ways in which I might be relating to the greater beingness from a dualistic lens. And there's a lot of different reasons why I think that it's important to have some anchoring in a tradition. So speaking here about, what's the value of still remaining in within spiritual culture once one has kind of recognized this non-dual reality. And one of those reasons is that it can be, well, let's face it, most of the people, including myself, who pass through this recognition and begin to cultivate a consistency of beingness as one, we're still very much human, and we're still very much affected by human emotions, human experiences. And even though many people will say no desires, no aversions, yeah, there's desires and aversions. Like, if you're alive, you've definitely got an aversion to death, because the aversion to death supports our ability to stay alive. It supports our capacity to keep this organism fed, clothed appropriately, not walking out in front of trucks. Like, yeah, the ego has an important place in sustaining the organism. So that was a tangent. Let's come back to hanging out in spiritual culture. Spiritual culture, because we do still have ego, we do still experience emotions, because most of us still have these karmic seeds that get ignited and fueled by different experiences in life. If we kind of have this very intensive contact with unity consciousness, and we don't have maps or guideposts in that, even if the maps and guideposts might be arbitrary, it is possible for some people to fall into illusory states where their over-identification with the experience of expansiveness might cause them to misunderstand what unity means. And instead of perceiving themselves as a part of the omnipotent, they might feel that they, the individual, are the omnipotent. So this is like a hijacking of the spiritual experience by a spiritual ego. And this is where you get cult leaders and, megalomaniacs and folks who, use their spiritual mana, their spiritual power, for fulfilling very individualistic wants and desires at the expense of other people around them. So, the maps and the guideposts that are provided by a spiritual tradition help us just kind of navigate through that very, very open field, because it is when we're beginning to stabilize being awareness, everything is quite unformed, quite fluid, and that fluidity can be recognized, and we can also just use some conceptualizations and some markers to kind of go, is this organism in this body still relating to this experience in a way that is of benefit, goodwill, and loving kindness towards all that is, rather than behaving in a way that is pleasant, exciting, and empowering for me. So yeah, that is a really, really helpful thing. Yeah, and then when we get to this realm of kind of like tapping out entirely from, and I don't want to make any assumptions about what's driving different people in these realms, right? Is like we've all got our reasons, and I think it's possible to be a part of a map, as I was referring to, without it needing to be religious, just as long as there's kind of like enough history and recognition of really grounded understanding in that map to kind of keep us on the straight and narrow. But when we tap out of that realm entirely and go, well, even non-dual practice is dual, and we again are losing this sense of, I feel like it's losing a sense of the sacred, miraculous profundity of what it is that we've been gifted with to experience, right? As I, thou, allows this organism in its unique embodiment to relate to that unity, to that oneness, with a great degree of respect, of deep love, of recognition of the blessing that it is to have that revealed. And maybe I'm talking around in circles a little, but I think it does help us maintain a sense of humility. And it does help us remain on a side of understanding which avoids some of the pitfalls and traps of nihilism. Because nihilism, as much as theoretically can check out from many perspectives, leaves us with not much to work with in terms of living this life in a good way, and finding a way forward as humanity in relationship with all that is. So this sense of devotion can be really helpful. And it's interesting to note too that worship, the term worship, actually comes from the root word work or worthy. And it refers to the act of actually instilling worthiness in something. So acts of prayer, of bhakti, of devotion, of, calling in or calling upon that unifying force as if it was separate from us, instills worth in all that is as well. To sit by a tree and to have a sense of devotion and worship as an expression of divinity, it gives that sense of worth to that being, and perhaps allows us to be in relationship with that particular beingness in a very different way. So we can see like worship or the I-thou dichotomy as a way of reclaiming the animistic qualities that were present in so many of our lives prior to, that's a whole nother story, isn't it? Like, we can say colonization, we can also kind of trace even back from our modern perspective of what colonization is, the separation of people from the land. And there's some beautiful work, of course. Abrams, many of you may be familiar with his work on language and the way that kind of the English language in particular, but many of the Western languages have kind of created this separation of the animistic beingness with and in nature. Yeah, so just a few little thoughts there. It was rather tangential. I'm not going to be making videos that have good structure, so hopefully if you've watched this to the end, you enjoy a conversational, meandering style. And if you have enjoyed it, hit like and subscribe. I really appreciate your watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.